When inspecting a home and that, there's always the main things that people want to know. And one of the number one concerns has to deal with electric and that. Before I actually go through the electric panel box, though, I want to give you a little safety tip in that. When you're coming up to check your electric and that, the first thing you want to do is touch that panel with the back of your hand. Because if there's a short in that, your nerves in your body will automatically pull you away from that. But if you touch that with the back of your hand or front of your hand, like most people do to open that up, it actually will suck you into it. One of the things I do, it's a little safety precaution I use, I have a tool that I can actually check that. I will test it along the panel and see if there's a short in that. If there is, it would light up much like it would do here if you have electric coming to it. Now once we get into the panel itself, there's several things we want to check. The first thing we want to check is the main breaker. This is the main breaker. We want to make sure that it's the proper size for this panel. And we want to check the main wires coming in that are feeding this panel. And if it's aluminum wiring, which this one is, and 99% of them are today, we want to make sure that there's a special coating that's put onto those wires. If there's not, the aluminum wire will corrode, and that's where you get your bad connections, and that's what causes the fire. The second thing we check then is to check each of the breakers themselves to make sure that they're the proper sizes and to make sure that each of the wires are the proper size wire going to that breaker. Because you'll have, for some of the 220s in that, you'll have a 12. For some of the lightings in that, you have a 14. So you want to make sure that the right gauge is there. The next thing we check is to see that if it has any GFCIs or AFCIs, those are extra protection breakers in that will trip if there's any type of short in it whatsoever. Generally you find AFCIs in bedrooms, GFCIs for bathrooms, kitchens, places like that. Then the next thing we do is we check each of the wires going in, especially in this grounding strip, because quite often electricians will stick 2, 3, 4 wires under one screw, and you only want one wire under there. Now most electricians will tell you there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, and to be quite honest, it doesn't break the code. What it breaks is what the manufacturer has specified for this panel. The problem you have is when you got this wire that's feeding this circuit upstairs, it goes through your house, feeds the circuit upstairs, you're using that circuit. While that's in use, that copper wire heats up. When the copper wire heats up, it expands. When you get done using it, it cools back down, it contracts. That constant expansion and contraction will actually loosen these screws. The manufacturer knows that, and so they've designed it with the right amount of torque so that if you put one wire underneath there and torque it down, that it will compensate for that. But if you start putting 2, 3, 4 wires underneath there, the expansion and contraction is way more than what the manufacturer intended, and so it loosens up, and that's where you end up with your electrical shorts. And then the final thing we check is to make sure all the grounding is properly installed in this panel. You got a connecting ground that connects both these sides together. Then you have a grounding bar that actually grounds the panel itself. And then all the different circuits have their ground wire going to those. One of the problems we mentioned earlier with doing electrical inspections and that has to deal with Federal Pacific panels. Federal Pacific is known for the breakers not tripping properly and then causing fire hazard. This particular house has a Federal Pacific panel. One of the ways to tell a Federal Pacific panel is by the notorious red covering on the edges of the breakers. You'll see that on through here. Now there's this panel here, you can see all the breakers in that are working properly in that. In fact, we can turn them off and flip them back on and they work properly. The problem of it is you never know when that breaker may fail to trip when there's a calling for a high voltage. Of course, this particular panel has a unique problem of its own, and that's the fact that they've knocked out some of their slots here for breakers, and then the breakers have either been removed or were never ever put there. And this is a violation because it's very easy for somebody to stick a finger in there, and that's all live behind there. And that's pretty much what we do inside the panel, the electrical panel. And the rest of the electrical systems all throughout the receptacles, the lights, and through the attic, checking the wiring and that.